Revenge films.
My name is Michelle Smith. I live together with my husband, Kevin, and our son, Richard, who will be turning 5 years old. My husband is a regular office employee. But Kevin always had a childish personality, and I couldn't even say out of flattery that he was a reliable person. I had hoped that once we had children, maybe he would pull it together more and become a better father, but that wasn't the case either. To be completely honest, I was disappointed. Recently, our son was becoming more and more talkative, and he was able to speak for himself. But because of my husband, it was almost like having 2 children at home all the time, and my daily stress only continued to pile up. I was working at the cashier of a department store part-time, and every day I would finish my work at 3. As soon as I was done, I would go and do the groceries for dinner, before going to pick up my son from his preschool. That was my daily routine. As soon as we got home, I would rush to finish up all of the chores, including cleaning the house, before getting around to cooking dinner for the whole family. My husband would come home just past 6 p.m. every day, and so I would ask him to go and take Richard into the bath first. While they were in the bath, I would rush to finish up, plating the dinner and laying it out on the table. While I would be putting the food out on the table, my son would always come running out of the bath and start picking up the plates before we sat down. I would always scold him and tell him that he needed to wait until we all sat down at the dinner table to start eating. But as soon as my husband would get out of the bath, he would sit down and start eating dinner without saying a word to any of us. And because of this, nothing that I said to my son mattered, and Richard would follow along with his dad and start eating without me. It would be one thing if they were just picking up the plates, and I would be able to tolerate that. But the 2 of them would get carried away. Even if I was still in the kitchen finishing up cooking, they would start eating and would often finish eating everything before I could even sit down. When I would finally finish cooking everything and had cleaned up around the kitchen, I would sit down on the dining table, but would be met with empty plates. All of the fried chicken and the pasta that I worked so hard to make was all gone. When I looked at Kevin and asked, "What about my food? What happened to my portion?" he would reply,
"I already ate everything. I was starving, couldn't help it."
And he would have no guilt or any shadow of an apology. And as if to follow along with that, my son would say nonchalantly,
"Everything was so good. Isn't there any more? I want seconds."
But I was so angry that I turned to my husband and said, "That doesn't mean you should eat my portion too, does it?" But then my husband would become childish and turn to Richard and say,
"Don't listen to your mom. She's so greedy when it comes to her food, like a little kid."
And he would complain directly to our 5-year-old son. Things like this continued to occur almost every day, and for days on end, I was left with nothing but scraps to eat for dinner. After Richard went to sleep, I would try to tell my husband over and over again that this wasn't good for the sake of our son, and it wasn't a good example. But no matter how many times I tried to talk to him, when it came time for dinner and the food was laid out in front of them, Kevin wouldn't wait, and they would finish all of the food before I could sit down. Little by little, I was starting to reach the limit of my patience. I was getting fed up with my husband, so I decided to talk to my mom about it. But she took it a lot more seriously than I expected, and so she suggested a certain plan for me to try putting into action at home. That plan was for me to eat before I lay out all of the food on the dining table for my son and husband to eat. I thought that was a great plan, and I decided to put that into action starting the next day. As usual, when my husband and son came out of the bath and made their way towards the dining room, I stood in the kitchen and then I ate all of the food that I had made for that evening. I made sure to do it just as they came into the dining room, and when my son saw that, he yelled out at me,
"That's not fair! How come you're the only one that gets to eat, Mommy?"
And then my husband chimed in,
"What the hell are you doing, eating dinner without us?"
and raised his voice at me. But that's when I calmly replied, "But this is what I have to do to be able to eat, otherwise you're going to eat it all," I said right back at him. Richard went quiet, and he did seem like he felt a little bit bad and understood, but to my shock, my husband started to throw a tantrum.
I didn't think that you were so greedy when it came to food, Michelle. You disgust me. Even though you're just the wife, who do you think you are?
He then stormed over to the kitchen and he threw all of the food that I had just made for dinner all over the floor. And then he stormed out of the house and went straight back to his family home. I was stunned. I couldn't forgive my husband for his actions, and I was so upset that I couldn't help the tears from falling down my face. Why was I left in this situation? When I didn't do anything wrong, and my husband was the one who was being unfair to begin with. When I thought about it, any feelings that I had left towards my husband instantly disappeared. The next day, my phone rang and I picked it up to the sound of my mother-in-law. "Excuse me, Michelle. I hear that you didn't let my son have any dinner yesterday?" She seemed high up on her horse as she spoke down to me. When I explained the full situation to her in detail, her response was even more shocking. "Even though you're just the wife, who do you think you are trying to have the same dinner as your husband? You're 100 years too early for that." She started saying complete nonsense towards me. My mother-in-law had gotten a divorce when she was younger, and she had raised my husband as a single mother. I knew that growing up she had spoiled him quite a lot, but even when he became an adult, she wasn't able to let go of him. I knew how much she spoiled him, but I didn't think that it was that bad. After I got married to Kevin, I heard that my mother-in-law had gotten married to a Portuguese man. I thought that she was finally able to let go of her son and that Kevin would grow up and become an adult after that. But I was shocked. The conversation was going in circles, and I knew there was no use speaking to her, so I hung up. But this time I got a call from my husband himself. And for some reason, as if to lecture me, he was talking down to me as well.
So, are you going to apologize for what you did yesterday?
My husband was the one that made a complete mess and wasted food that I had spent all evening cooking. But he didn't seem to have any bit of regret whatsoever, and I only became more irritated at his attitude. And then, with even more pride in his voice, he had the audacity to say to me,
"If you're a wife that can't even take care of her husband, then we're gonna get a divorce. If you don't want to do that, then you better fix that personality of yours. Stop hogging all of the dinner to yourself, and you better stop talking back to me, too."
I couldn't believe that my husband was taking this attitude, and something finally snapped inside of me. Is that so? Well then fine. I would be much better off without a selfish, greedy husband like you anyway. Every single day you eat all of the food that I make for the family, and you don't even leave anything for me. I'm over it. I've had enough. You don't need to come back home anymore. When I said that, I immediately hung up the phone and started packing up my bags. Ever since we had Richard, I had been concerned by my husband's parenting. I always felt that if I let things go on like this, it was only going to be a negative influence on my son's personality. So in order to protect my son and raise him properly, I decided to get a divorce and move back in with my family. I then called my parents and I explained the situation to them. They were very quick to agree, and so that following weekend, I packed up everything that I had and moved out. During that time, Kevin had actually sent me the divorce papers, but he hadn't signed them yet. So I gladly signed those divorce papers and sent it directly to his mom's house. As soon as that was done, I completed moving into my family home, and Richard and I began living there with my parents. A few days later, I received a phone call from Kevin, and I could hear the panic in his voice. As it turns out, he didn't even bother to open the envelope that I had sent him. However, when he finally did, he realized that I had already signed the papers, and he panicked and called me.
"What the hell is this? Who do you think you are? I'm not divorcing you."
Kevin was clearly flustered, but I maintained calm and said, "You're the one that suggested the divorce, aren't you?" But then Kevin cried,
"That was just a little threat. I just wanted you to regret what you did."
When I told him that I was seriously planning on getting a divorce, my husband's tune instantly flipped. This time, he sounded like he was going to cry, and all he said was,
"I don't want to get a divorce."
But But it was too late. My decision was firm. Despite me warning him multiple times about eating all of the dinner before me, he didn't see anything wrong with it and continued to ignore me. I had no love left for Kevin. And not only that, it was unbelievable that he would suggest a divorce as a threat. Kevin was begging that he didn't want to get a divorce, but all I said was for him to hurry up and sign the papers and turn them into the city office. And then I hung up. When we moved in with my parents, my son learned that eating everybody else's food was wrong. And he finally understood that you needed to wait to eat until everybody was sat down at the table. And to be honest, to think that he wasn't able to do that until now sent chills on my spine. I received multiple phone calls and messages from my husband, but my only response was that if he wasn't going to sign the divorce papers and turn them in, I would hire a lawyer, and I refused to answer the phone after that. But then not long after that, on the weekend, suddenly my husband showed up at my parents' house. With tears in his eyes, he said,
Please, I'm begging you, you have to come back. The only thing my mom makes is Portuguese dishes. I just want to eat your cooking one more time.
He was practically on his knees, but my only response was, What makes you think that I will ever cook for someone like you again, after you didn't even leave enough food for your wife and then you wasted it all by throwing it on the ground? Leave now. And then I kicked him out. Outside of the front door, Kevin was on his knees, crying and begging. But when my mom told him, You're going to cause a disturbance to the neighbors. Shall I call the police? He quietly got up and left. After that, the divorce went through. I started my new life with my parents and my son, and we lived happily together. As for my husband, he got rid of the apartment where we were living together, and he moved in with his mom and her Portuguese husband. But he wasn't able to get along with his stepfather, and he became more stressed. On top of that, his mother was more in love with her new husband than her son. And even when he said he wanted to eat Japanese food, she refused to listen. As a result of that, Kevin must have realized how grateful he was for my cooking and finally regretted what he did. Even after the divorce, he sent me multiple messages of apology. I was relieved that he finally seemed to understand, but I had no intention of getting back with him. Now, I only have to see him once a month, when he sees Richard, because he's paying child support fees. I am allowing these meetings, but if he starts getting carried away again, I told him he better be prepared for us to cut him off entirely. After that, he never got carried away in front of me again.
How was today's video? If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, like, and leave a comment. Stay tuned for more.